Jesus freak here. This is mainly for those people connected to the Righteous Reformation, channels like Laurelyn Tyler Thompson, Social Fire E-Church, The Unction, Ohio for Freedom, by Faith Elizabeth Davis, where I tend to lurk in their chats and comment a lot. And I'm sure that some people are thinking that I'm just trying to piggyback off whatever they're talking about. And to be honest, I'm talking about my own situation not because I'm trying to be a hanger on, but because I can relate. Now, I almost certainly come from a different faith tradition than y'all. I am a more or less lifelong United Methodist. And I see a lot of people in the chat, the Pentecostals, or maybe Baptists. So I admit I'm a bit of a different Christian. Now, I will say that we haven't had as much trouble in our church with the kinds of abuse that you're always hearing about in the independent Baptist churches and Pentecostal churches and the charismatic churches, and especially in the New Apostolic Reformation. We do have them. In fact, the pastor of a previous church that I used to attend, which is now gone, got in trouble because he had his hand in a jar. If you want to find out about that, I guess Google Peter Del Rio, Niagara Falls. You'll probably find out what I'm talking about. Now, I have a lot of trauma from abuse. In fact, among my diagnoses is one that's basically equivalent to, and we're trying to get it adjusted, but it's basically, it's PTSD, but we don't want to say it's PTSD. I was abused as a kid. Never SA. I know a lot of people, when they've dealt with abuse, it's been SA at least part of the time. Fortunately, that's the one I haven't dealt with. But when they say, beat you around like a red-headed stepchild is, a metaphor or simile, I was a red-headed stepchild. Pretty much literally. Okay? And a lot of it had to do with, culture shock, coming out of a foster home where they actually cared for me, and my parents were of the type that, they wanted me back in the family, not because they gave a damn about me, because they didn't care. They just didn't want me in another home. So they got me, but they were very, abusive. But they always managed to be just this side of legal. I think that's pretty common, that Either they try to be just this side illegal, or they'll do everything they can to keep anyone from seeing what's going on. You'll find people that say homeschooling is, the better approach because they think public schools is derelicting the parental duty. A lot of them, that's not why they do it. They do it because a lot of people in schools are mandated reporters. If they were doing something to their kids, they'd have to tell social services. And social services did have their eye on my family. Technically, my grandmother adopted me. It was an open adoption. And it was more on paper thing than it was, actually. Now, she was narcissistic. She was probably bipolar. She was very bitter. And I lived with her and my uncle, who was my dad's brother. Now, he was mama's boy. From what I hear, he was barely able to function after she died of stroke. In 91, she was 75. I think we basically just freewheeled for a few months, and then I was out of there after I tried to self-delete in middle school. A lot of stuff that went on. We always tried to justify the way I was treated as, you're just evil, you're just a bastard, you're just, beat the waywardness out of you, spare the rod. My uncle listened a lot to James Dobson. His radio show was broadcast on a station we listened to most of the time. On the plus side, Johnny Tata's program was also broadcast on that station for years. So, I had an idea who Johnny Erickson Tata was, even though I, didn't know what she had been through. She had been through a bit. Now, at the time I lived with my family, my uncles were not yet pastors. But there's a thing in our faith tradition where there's people who aren't pastors that sometimes fill in for pastors. Both my uncles were that. So they would occasionally go and preach in other churches if the pastors were unavailable. So I was kind of a PK, as you'd say. Now, I had a bunch of verses thrown at me, one of the biggest clobber verses. They twisted the rebuke not an elder verse to say, anyone who was older than you had power over you and could tell you what to do, and you had to do it. When that's not even what that verse is talking about in context, but that's how abusers work. They don't care about the context. They use any verse they can to justify themselves. I think it was just out of pure narcissism my grandmother took me in. Because I remember saying, that saying, children should be seen and not heard. Well, if I had my way, children would be neither seen nor heard. Like, why bother then? Right? Now, I'm going to say that I do have skin in this game from my experience. I'm a wreck, and a lot of it does have to do with religion. But unlike a lot of people who've been through spiritual abuse, I kept the faith. Probably because I understood that it wasn't my faith tradition. It wasn't God. It wasn't any of that. It was people who hurt me. And honestly, I've never had trouble with things that were specific to my faith tradition, were taught by my faith tradition. You notice another YouTuber I follow, I forgot to mention, James P. White. He has a quote on his wall that's attributed to John Wesley. I don't think he comes from the exact faith tradition I come from, but that he's broadly from the Methodist tradition, just as I am. So I'm fairly familiar with John Wesley's interpretation of Christianity. That's more or less where I stand. Now, I'm a small-time YouTuber. I'd rather keep it that way. But I'm glad for those who follow me. Now, I wanted to go to the Righteous Reformation conference thing, whatever it was, last month. But it wasn't practical for me. The first reason is I'm on a fixed income, so I have to focus on practical things. The second is I'm a bundle of nerves if I'm not able to turn around and come home if I have to. Even if I'm not going to resort to that, I don't have anyone that can take me. I don't have a way to say, can someone go with me because I don't want to be by myself. So I have to get somewhere myself. And realistically speaking, unless something is within the reach of, more or less within the reach of public transportation. So we're talking Niagara Falls, Buffalo, Lockport, North Tonawanda. That's pretty much outside of those parts of Western New York. I can't really go any further than that. Doesn't mean I don't want to. It's just not practical. And the third problem is I don't have anyone to watch my cat. So I don't like to be out for more than like a day and a half or so. She can take care of herself, and I usually, leave the tap on. She can get a drink of fresh water if she wants. Not like all the way on, but I leave it on so she can get a drink. But I think I'd be just too concerned about her if we're out more than like a day and a half or so. That said, anyone's got anything, if they want to do something up here, or if they want to do something over Zoom, Google Meet, anything of that ilk, I'm perfectly willing to join and sit in, or, even give my piece. But just wanted to make things a little clearer as to where I stand on these things. Anyway, any old chats that I seem to get sporadic YouTube notifications about, I hope to see any there. And I hope you understand my situation. Jesus freak out.